Apologies, go for it to item number 3.
Great. Okay. I think I'm introing into this, and then Jimmy's gonna take over. Michelle, you weren't here for the intros, but myself and Jimmy work for Whitbread, and we attended the CDRC Data Partners Forum on behalf of Doug, which was held at Oxford. I get it wrong. Sage Business School, on the 11th of November this year. So basically, the agenda for that event was we had a few talks from partners, CDRC Data Partners Forum partners, around innovations that they've made recently. And then there were some presentations from master's students who were finalists to receive an award. And then we had a panel session, and finally a keynote around the leveling up agenda in uncertain economic times. So I thought what I would do is sort of skim through that agenda, and I wrote about 6 pages of notes in the session and just sort of point out the things I thought were interesting. And then during that day, several of the people presenting described available data sources, and Jimmy's going to take us through those, having had a look through them and what they might be useful for you in your own worlds. So originally, the first section, partnership innovations, there are a few interesting presentations in there. So the first one was from a company called Geolytics, who were using mobile location data to identify where they should open supermarket stores. The justification they were able to give for how the reason that they were able to use that data was because it was incomplete, which I thought was sort of interesting. But essentially, they were able to use analytics to take that noisy data and turn it into meaningful footfall data or density data. They were using CDRC data, so the map maker that I think is on the CDRC website was sort of demoed in that session. I would really suggest, if you have a chance, to take a look at that. I'm sure that's a URL that can be shared later. If Jimmy's not got it, I'll post it in the chat.
I was going to say I'll share that shortly.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'll move on then. So then the next one was around. This is a long title. Participatory Urban Analytics, the Idea Maps approach to map urban deprived areas. So this was talking around favela in Sao Paulo, I believe. And essentially their sort of opening gambit was, the quote that they used was, Twitter reflects the rainfall of the rich, but not the rainfall of the poor, which is a really interesting concept. Essentially what it's saying is, the majority of the data that we have that comes from consumer devices or individuals comes from those that have access to the services that we're drawing the data from. Now that in the Western world is a reasonably good coverage, right? But you're still going to have populations of people who, for various reasons, aren't using the internet or mobile devices, whether they be elderly, unable to, or not able to afford access to these sorts of things. Whereas where this piece of work was being delivered in Sao Paulo, it's more the norm than it is, the exception to the rule. So the problem that they had was, for the delivery of aid, they needed to know where people lived. And favelas don't have maps, so how do you create an understanding of where you need to deliver things in a world where the digital data you have does not reflect the people you're talking about. And they had some really interesting images to show. There was a particular picture of a door which had about 15 different house numbers on it. And the explanation for that was every single time a new charity comes in and tries to help, they all number the houses differently. So if you want to receive aid from these charities, you've got to have all of your house numbers on show, because it depends who's coming asking as to which map you're on and what your house number is. So the way that they actually solved this problem was to get really involved with the community and get individuals in the community to help them gather data and provide the missing data that they've got. That's interesting, but from our perspective, I think the point being made that's more interesting is around how do you identify and correct bias in your data through omission. We're very used to taking the totality of the data that we've got and saying that this is all that's going on, and I'm going to segment this to try and identify different behavioral trends or what have you. But there is also the group that is not covered by your data, and I think that's a useful thing to keep in mind depending on exactly the piece of work that you're trying to deliver. And then the next section, Alexa's piping up. So there was some interesting things around Gamble Aware. So Gamble Aware being the organization that works with bet providers to allow them to give their customers the opportunity to self-exclude, and it works across brands. So there was a presentation from somebody from Gamble Aware on how they can identify problem gamblers and what the tools they have to enable them to make the best choice for them. Interesting thing that came out of that one was access is what they hypothesize is the thing that leads to increases in gambling. So 70% of gambling occurs online, and online gambling is really, really accessible. And so obviously there is competing interests there. If you're somebody whose role it is to reduce problem gambling, it's very hard not to find yourself at odds with a company who wants to then increase revenue. So that seemed like quite a sort of fine line to walk. The only sort of parallel that we would have in ours, so we obviously don't sell any gambling product, but we have on the one hand a desire to do the best thing for the customer, because we've got a set of core company values that say that if you're fighting for the customer, you'll get better loyalty and better long-term return on investment. And then on the other hand, we've got the short-term mechanics of commercial organization, which says sell as much as you can for as much money as possible, as quickly as possible. So how do you put those two forces up against each other in a way that is strategically defensible? I think that's a pretty common occurrence, that you're going to have these sort of competing forces, and data is an enabler, and data analysts and data scientists are using or deploying data to sort of enable whatever they would like. So you can use data in either direction, and you've got to make a choice. You've got to make quite a high level design choice when going into some of these problems. Otherwise, you're going to end up an inefficient system that produces revenue will, by virtue of it being inefficient, not be squeezing every last drop out of your customer. And so because of that, your customers are going to not feel the downsides of being sort of inundated with the very nth degree of marketing and commerciality. If you deploy data to make that system more performant or more efficient, you go further and further down that route. So you have to have a force pulling you back in the other direction to say, no, 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 too much marketing is too much marketing, for example. So I thought that was interesting. And then I think I'll just sort of call out a quote from the panel section, which I thought was particularly thought-provoking, or a couple of quotes, which was, the first one is, the only constant in data is change, which is very grandiose, but how that was meaningful to me, I think, is when you're designing a process that uses data you have available now, you must always understand that the equation you've come up with to explain a certain behavior or pattern is subject to change. Your consumers change, the availability of your data changes, your strategy changes. So it's more about understanding the relationships between consumers and products, and performance indices and consumers, for example, than it is locking in a particular sort of logical approach. If you understand and can describe the relationship, then given change, you can update your strategy. Whereas if you rely on a specific relationship that you can't really describe dynamically, then you're building into your solution debt in terms of the future where these inputs change. Lastly, then, there's something called the data divide, which in this instance was described as those who produce data are the only ones with a vote on the shape of infrastructure and future systems development. So that was around, we have increasing monopoly of data production with, Google and Facebook and all these sort of social networks and things. And if you follow that course through to the end, what you'll get is data that is very useful in enabling the commercial interests of those companies, but not necessarily good at allowing you to spot new insights or look at things in different ways. So you must always be looking for new sources of data and ways to validate the conclusions you're coming at. And you should try where possible to use, if you can't use internal data, you should try to use data from organizations who don't have a commercial or some sort of bias, right? You should be trying to use data from places like census, CDRC, that kind of thing, because the interests are different. So you can sort of avoid more bias in that way. And that got me and Jimmy on the day thinking around the difference between academia and commercial organizations. And that was an Oxford University sponsored event, and there was lots of academic research there. It was very, very clear that the standards for data cleanliness and logic and what you would need to have in place in order to be able to make a decision were different to what we have at Whitbread. Because we're a commercial organization, we essentially make bets all of the time with incomplete data. We've got good data, we've got very, very good data, but it's never going to be complete, absolutely complete. And really, we're making hypotheses and making assumptions, and then using those to drive commercial strategy, which is different to how a educational organization would operate, or research organization would operate. So yeah, that's just a few thoughts. Having attended the session, I would really encourage everyone to try and go next year. And I'll hand over to Jimmy to talk about some of the data products which are available to you all that we got from that session.
Okay. Yeah. Cheers, Stevie. I'm not sure how much time I've got here, but I'll try and be just go through this at a reasonable pace.
I don't think you're too pressed for time. I think it's okay at just whatever time you need.
Okay, cool. You can see my screen,
Yes.
I guess, the plain Whitbread screen. Cool. So up to the event, I thought I would share with our data community at Whitbread some of the data sources that were shared with us by the CDRC. And so to set this up for our data community, I sort of said, I mean, this is what you can do with geography and demographic data. And I shared this website that I found literally the day after the CDRC conference, where Co-op have created their own version of a deprivation index, essentially, using various sources of data. And lo and behold, part of what they've done is actually use CDRC data. So before I go into what the CDRC data is, I just wanted to show you this website because it's a really good demonstration of using demographic and location data. I appreciate I'm probably preaching to the choir here, especially as we've got a head of network planning here. But yeah, essentially, we've got this index which uses various data sources at a geography level and computes scores for various facets. Sorry, is someone trying to say something?
I think there's a live mic somewhere.
Oh, okay. So to bring this to life, I've popped in my postcode in Oxford. I actually live 5 minutes down the road from the Saïd Business School where this event was, which was over here. And yeah, we can see various scores for my area. You know, quite lucky with the with various pieces here. So let's look at education and learning. What goes into that score there? So we can go in and we can see which data sources make up these scores, and likewise with place, what makes this up, and we can see sources from the census on types of workers, places of worship, which are from Google Maps and so on. I think the one that I pulled up here, which showed some CDRC data, was housing space and environments. What makes up that score? Affordability, overcrowding. All of these sources are open source, and here's an air quality index which comes from the CDRC. So I thought that was a really, really nice demonstration of using geography data to build an application. So if I pop back to the websites that were this is one of the websites that was shared with us by the CDRC. And this is where we can access some of the data that they've put together over the last 10 years. So for those that don't know, the CDRC have had funding, I think, since 2012 or 2013, so nearly 10 years. And over that time, we've had all these academics and PhD students assembling data sets, and they're all stored here. They've been verified and vetted and so on. So if we were to go into if we click through and view our data sets, and we end up on this screen here, and we can see there are quite a lot of different sorts here. Some are safeguarded, some are secure, but I thought we could click on the open data sets, and you can see quite a lot here. Now, the food index was mentioned quite a few times at the CDRC conference. So we had a talk. We had someone from the University of Leeds talking on that. And how he's used the food index within his department. I did actually, due to internet issues, Fran, I didn't quite hear what your relationship is with the CDRC, but I've got a feeling you're going to go into this later, so I won't dwell there. But it's good to know. So this is presumably a really, really important output from the group. So yeah, all of these residential mobility index was spoken about. So I think Geolytics was saying this is a great indicator of trying to work out where to set up a new store, for example, if you've got a lot of churn in the residential population. London's a great example where you move to London, you meet your partner, and then you go off and get married and live in the regions again. So there are lots of high churn areas in the UK, and this is one of the data sources we can use to bring that and map it to our own data sets. So I do a lot of customer analytics. I've used a lot of the census data before, the populations of towns, the index of multiple deprivation, things like this, which do have an impact on some of the predictions that I'm making. And I think having something like this might also be useful. So there's lots of data here. I'll pop the link in the chat, and I'd say explore and see how some of these might be useful for your business. We saw the air quality one earlier as well, and I feel like there might be something to do with footfall here in terms of digital mobile data. I know that was spoken about at the conference. The second resource they shared with us was MapMaker. So we saw on that co-op website, a pretty decent map. I feel like it might even sit on top of the same underlying geolytics map. So I think geolytics in the background doing the software here, and it's a pretty useful. So again, if we pop into my area in Oxford, there's that Said Business Schools over here. Where we can see internet user classification here, for example, but there are so many different topics we can use to filter the data. I assume it's using all of the data sets in the background that we were just looking at. We can look at retail centres. So if I was in network planning myself, I think this could be quite a useful tool rather than building something in-house. But anyway, I thought that this was one of the resources they encouraged us to share. So I'll pop a link to this in the chat as well. And then finally, the final resource they shared with us were the apps that they've produced. So you can see there that's going to be handy to work out what data sets are available in certain postcodes. We could use that app. I thought as Fran's speaking next, she might well touch on some of this and might have even been involved. Priority places for food. So if we click into that app, we can see here that certain areas that have got the highest decile. Just another way that we can use data in a geography context. So there's a lot here, and there's a lot to explore. I feel like it's an untapped treasure trove at Whitbread. So I'm excited to start using all this. I think I'll finish there if that's okay, unless there are any questions or anyone wants me to dive into any of these links.
I think that's really useful. Thank you very much. I think the CDRC is like you say, it's a treasure trove of data. Certainly, there's if you look at some of the data sets that are in there, there's one large loyalty card, anonymized loyalty card data set in there, for example. So some of the projects I know I'd worked on with organisations in the past was looking at retailer healthcare data and see whether there was any way you could get early predictors of certain cancers from basically non-prescription drugs and how people were using non-prescription, which turns out there is some. I believe there's still more ongoing research being done, but it kind of passed the initial test of actually. So I think it's a good way for organisations, if you've got as well anonymised data sets that are useful for researchers. It's a good way of putting data into there to make it available. And again, back to the recruitment bit, it's a really good way of if people are working on your data, if you've done that, it's a good way of getting a sneaky look at somebody who's actually working on your data and might want to work with your company as well. So I should give a plug for the internet user classification, because the guy who built it, well, there's two people involved building it. One comes back to other CDRC partners, which is Liverpool, which I'm sure Fran will mention, so I won't go too much into that. But one of the guys who, other than Alex Singleton at Liverpool, one of the guys who built it was Dean Riddleston, who's head of data science at Pets at Home, who's reasonably. He's quite chatty and quite personable. So if anybody looks at that and wants further info, Dean's rarely shy of talking about it if anybody ever approached Dean. So that's really useful. Thank you very much.